begin in just one more minute. Allow people time to hop over from the gallery into the session area.
Jason, I have a few places where I'll be asking people to put stuff into chat, and I'll be sharing my screen so I can't see both at the same time. When we do that, would you mind coming up and just reading me what's in chat so that I can make sure I stay connected with what people are asking for?
Certainly. My video will no longer be up, but I'll still be in the session. I'll be monitoring the chat and relaying
Perfect.
those questions and comments to you.
As long as you can still talk, that's really.
Certainly, yep.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. Looks like we're right at 10:10. So introducing the session, this is Career Pathways for Jobs in West Virginia. It's analyzing labor market data and script creation to use with students, achieving student outcomes with their educational pathway to employment. Want to take a moment to introduce Dr. Casey Sachs, who has rejoined us at the Higher Education Policy Commission and the West Virginia Community Technical College System as our Vice Chancellor for the West Virginia Community and Technical College System. Her primary roles include providing vision and leadership for statewide initiatives in the areas of policy support, workforce development, technology innovation, program recruitment and retention, grant management, and the delivery of community and technical college education. She's particularly excited about leadership development in the West Virginia system and started a Dean's Academy to help support mid-level managers. Casey's been very involved nationally with the college completion agenda through the Charles A. Dana Center and at the University of Texas at Austin with the Complete College America. She's an advocate for creating structures that help our students to complete college and move into jobs that allow them to sustain their families and support their communities. Prior to her work in West Virginia, Sachs spent 8 years at the Colorado Community College System in academic affairs. There, she provided key leadership for system-wide developmental education policy reform. She completed her PhD in higher education administration at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, specializing in institutional planning. She's an active Rotarian, avid equestrian, and travel enthusiast. And just even more recently, Sachs has been named the acting president of Bridge Valley Community and Technical College. So congratulations, Dr. Sachs, and we're very thrilled and excited to have you here today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I'd love to get a sense. It looks like we have 54 people who've joined today. So I'm thrilled y'all are this interested in labor market information. That bodes well for our state. If you would just take a minute and put into chat maybe who you are and what your role is in your college, it will allow me to speak a little bit more directly to the things that you might be doing in your institution. So if you just take a minute and put into chat what your role is and where you're calling in from today, that would be very helpful. And good morning to my friends who are saying hello. That's just so nice. Jill and Josh and Pam and Elizabeth. So Jeff's currently an educator at Midland Trial High School. So we have a high school specialist here. Veterans Upward Bound out of Martinsburg, a counselor in Nicholas County, transition and education program specialist, rehab services, agriculture educator. This is fabulous. Coordinator of student activities at New River, retention specialist at State, school counselor in Mingo County. So getting a real sense of, we've got the spectrum in this room right now. We've got K-12 people, both at the teaching level and also folks who are more of an administrative function in K-12. I'm seeing lots of folks from community colleges, both academic and student affairs, and four-year institutions. Not quite as many of you seem to be popping up, but similarly, like, we really are talking about the trajectory of some of our education services in the state. So that's fantastic. I want to talk with you today, and hopefully I can get my screen to share, just about career pathways. It's something that I've become really excited about in the last several years. And I think a huge part of that is that we really see that there's a ton of opportunity for students, and career pathways seems to be a much simpler way of organizing. A lot of what I'm going to tell you, you're going to be like, of course, this makes perfect sense, or it's sort of, a lot of the pieces are what we're already doing. But the idea is to start with the end in mind, and how do we help students really think about jobs that they could actually get in West Virginia. You know, I did a workshop out in Mingo County a couple of years ago and was talking to some high school students about what they wanted to do. And I always ask students to come up with some job options. And one of the young men in the group said he wanted to be a bounty hunter. And I'm not specific to what they choose or what they research. I'm like, okay, great. What kind of education do you need to be a bounty hunter? And he looked it up and we're talking about it. And I said, okay, can you do that here? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, can you live in Mingo County and be a bounty hunter? I have no idea. Let's look it up. So we start looking it up and he was like, oh, I have to move. I have to move really far. I can't do that job here. I was like, okay. So is it still the right job? And I think that that's sort of the idea around career pathways, is how do we help some of those students conceptualize what's that end that I have in mind? And of course, I know that this can change. And of course, it's changed for me several times in my own life. So of course, yes, it's going to change for students. But starting with some end in mind gets you on a trajectory, and it's totally fine to change your pathway. But to help students understand all of that is, I think, part of our role in this space. So I'd ask that you'd go to chat and type in the chat box what you think of when you hear me say even career pathways. What's your initial frame of reference? And Jason, if you'll read me what comes up in the chat box, I'd appreciate it.
I will do. Yep. Career searching, a foundation for future employment.
Great.
The path to a career, transitions. Oh, that's knowing the options for training and careers.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, you all are exactly on the right track. It really is about how do we think about how are you going to get from point A to point B. In some colleges, we talk about organizing programs by meta major. In some high schools, similar things, organizing by programs of study. And what I've seen over the years in the career pathway CTE space, especially, some of the best organizing framework seems to be around these 16 career clusters. So sort of what are the big buckets? Recognizing that there are potentially dozens or hundreds even of pathways that are in each area. So if you have a student who comes in and thinks, gosh, I think I might want to go into health science. Health science is a really big area and there's lots of potential pathways that could be in there, but it allows us to narrow in enough to get students on a pathway where we can say, great, take this introduction class or take this exploratory opportunity, or in K-12, terrific, you think you want to be in health sciences. Can we get you into a nursing home now? Can we get you your CNA certification now so that you can get some of those really early exposure experiences to find out if you're in the right field? And if you're not, some of the most important learning that happens, especially early on in that career exploration space, is you learned that you hated something. And that's an amazing gift also. So it really is thinking about what's the pathway and what are the experiences that we can get students on it. So, manufacturing is another great one. Can we get you into a manufacturing shop now so you can think about what's possible, recognizing that you could still change directions many, many times, and certainly probably will throughout your career. So the example I love to use is actually in healthcare. When we think about healthcare as a career cluster, and one possible pathway is in nursing, but even within nursing, you could go from a CNA to an RN, to a BSN, to an MSN, to a doctorate in practical nursing. And that's just one micro area of what's possible. So there's a lot of education that you can get along the way and steps that happen. But at each point, you really stop and you work and you think, gosh, I've been in this RN experience and I see that if I want to get promoted in the hospital where I work, I need to get the BSN. And so that's when you need that on-ramp to be able to go back to school. So, but I mean, there's just so many of these. So helping students think about them, but also helping us sort of dig into what are the ones that are really needed in West Virginia, I hope is where we can spend some of our time today. Because when we get through healthcare, part of what I start asking is, so I have this whole list, nursing and radiology and home health care and mental health and emergency health. These are really different jobs from each other. And there's also really different pay within all of these areas and different career demand. So we might need 1 or 2 mental health specialists and 50 or 60 RNs. And so even recognizing that for what our labor market needs can help us better inform people who we're talking to about, gosh, did you know this was even possible? So that transitions me right into what does the West Virginia labor market need? So sort of very big picture for you, since I've already done the research. I'm going to show you in a second how to do this research on your own. But in really broad strokes, we need people in healthcare, information technology, manufacturing, energy, and transportation, distribution, and logistics. Those are sort of the career pathways that are the most in demand right now in our state. So when I look at job openings and when I look at our statewide data set and start digging into what kinds of jobs do we most need to prepare students for, it's jobs in these areas. So I want to show you how I did that, because you can do this too. And I think we won't have enough time today to really dig into this level of detail, but I want you to understand how you could, because then you can do it yourself. So the tool I use, and this is the same tool that the Economic Development Office uses, and Workforce West Virginia has access to this. Certainly all of our community colleges have access. It's a program called Economic Modeling. So the short name for it is EMSI, and it's just a pay-for subscription on a website, but they're a job aggregator. And so the other company, if you're already familiar with this space, you might have heard of either MC, EMSI, or Burning Glass. And they actually this year announced that they're merging. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a new name, but I have read in the news that these two companies have said, we have all this incredible data and people are using it in a number of ways, both in economic and workforce development and education. And so how do we push this out? So the community college system has a subscription to it, which is how I use it. And I just pulled up over here on the occupation side, I put in registered nurses and then am searching for West Virginia, but I can get really granular. So if what I'm interested in is not West Virginia, if what I'm interested in is, let's say, Mingo County, I can get into that level of detail and say what's exactly going on in my county, which is not always the same as what's going on in the state. So here, this is for RNs. We can see that the United States average of postings, we've got slightly more jobs for nurses in West Virginia than the country as a whole. So it's a hotspot for nursing jobs. The average size you can see for an area that would be West Virginia similar would be just almost 14,000 people. But instead what we're seeing is a job density almost closer to 20,000 people. So a real need. People who are hiring nurses are actively hiring nurses. But what we also see is that nurses in West Virginia are making a lot less than what the national median salary is for nurses. So it's more than $10,000 less than what median looks like for the nation. So when we start thinking about people who we train here in West Virginia who decide to, go to Ohio or surrounding communities, this starts to make more sense when we start thinking about just the economy of it. But huge demand. We also see that employers in the state are posting jobs for nurses in West Virginia like gangbusters, that it's high activity. And it's because we really need nurses. So I would love to put this in for another occupation. If somebody would put into chat something that you're interested in. I just chose nursing because I know there's a huge demand in the state, but happy to put in something else if you have another occupation that's of interest. And if Jason, you'll tell me what someone tells us, then we'll put this in here.
Yeah, certainly. And we'll give them just a couple moments to type something in. While they do, I'll read a couple more of the comments. It was a combination of education, training, experience, networking, and the search,
Yes.
Knowing where to start and where you want to go. The PEP plans for students is something somebody thought of.
Yeah.
And then here are a few more steps towards career choice, education, training, etc. Training, education required to reach career goals. So those are some of the things they thought of as far as what they thought career pathways meant to them. Here are a few that they're recommending now: teaching, machinist, athletic training, software development, counseling, social work, graphic.
So you said teaching first, so I'll just start there.
Okay.
You can see when I even just put in teach, there's a lot of options. So we can select all of the teaching occupations, or we can start being really granular and saying, gosh, I was interested in teaching globally, but it turns out I don't want to know everything from kindergarten to college. It turns out what I really want to know is what's happening in special education. And so I might put in all of these special education categories. I might select all of them, and we can select as many as we want. So that I can get middle school and secondary school, because it's possible that we could be interested in what's the special education picture look like sort of across the learning trajectory. So let's pull that one up to see what the demand is. So I chose all special education teachers from the categories that exist, and we'll do statewide and give it a second. And so what we can see, again, a slightly less demand than what we saw in nursing, but again, a lot of jobs, a lot of special education jobs that are happening right now in West Virginia, significantly lower earnings than the national median salary. So here in West Virginia, we're seeing special education teachers being paid about $47,000, and the national median salary $61,000. So if that helps you, if you're a person who's looking for a special education teacher, you've got to think about what's the cost of living in West Virginia. You're going to want to make your job more attractive in other ways. Are we more flexible than other places? Are we nicer than other places? Certainly it's more beautiful here than anywhere else. But thinking about the proposition for living here and making more than $10,000 less than you would make if you lived somewhere else, what's the trade-off there? And just recognizing that that's part of our reality. And this, at least for me, when I talk to students, this really helps me frame that conversation, because it's not only about money, but it is about your expectations. So if you're a student, if you're that young man who I was talking to who wants to be a bounty hunter, and you realize the job just does not exist in Mingo County and you want to live in Mingo County, you have to change your expectations and decide what's the most important thing to you. Do you want to do this job more than anything? And that probably means that you're going to be more transient, or that you're going to have to live in a more metropolitan region, or is it really important that you live here? In which case we can dig in and say, what are the jobs then in Mingo County, so that I can study something that allows me to be where my family is and allows me to be in the place that I love. So I think certainly that is part of it. Let me come back. Oh, there. And so Samantha, who's a special education coordinator in Jackson County, who's in our room right now, probably has some really specific ideas about how do we design the work that she might need in Jackson County? How do we do that? So do folks have questions? Do you want me to run anything else, or do you have questions about how you might even start to look at some of the labor market data at this point? I'm going to pause and give you an opportunity to say, I'm with you.
I did have a comment from Josh Baker saying that he loves that you're identifying that the pathway is the opportunity to obtain the experience and more training to expand career opportunities. It's critical to understand that we purposefully design pathways. So the nursing pathway is really an ideal one, a certificate through DNP.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for saying so. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is that, you know, in this room right now, we represent from K-12 through higher, certainly colleges and universities are all in the room. So when we think about graduate education, that a pathway really can be, you know, my first job was changing oil in a grease stop. It's not what I'm doing right now. I'm a college president. And so thinking about what my career pathway has been, it's been varied. And recognizing that being in that grease stop was a really good experience for me. And I understood CTE in a way that I might not have understood it otherwise, and allowed me at some point in my career to be a dean for career and technical education. and really understand the programs that I was helping serve, particularly my automotive programs. And so you never know where you'll make those connections, but really, especially at early career exploration, helping people understand how might I connect both to a career field and to intentional work experiences while I'm still going to school helps build up our students to be more successful in the workforce. So let me move. Okay, so we think about, what does our labor market need? So I would ask you to think about jobs in your area. When we analyze labor market data, and so let's just say you're in an area where you need IT. If Josh Baker was the one who just gave us a comment, he's out in Huntington, and the Huntington area is absolutely hiring people in the IT field. And IT is an interesting one because it crosses disciplines. You need someone to run your computer system in a hospital. You need someone to do the same thing in Walmart. So IT is really across retail and healthcare, and it's not just that you're working in a technology firm, but that you're providing technology services across any number of discipline areas. So let's say IT, because I love having an example. What do you say to students? If we know IT is an area where there are jobs out in Huntington, how do you talk to a student who comes in and says, gosh, I have no idea what I want to do. I just am coming to school because my, family told me that it was a good idea and that I ought to come to school. How do we help direct students into a more intentional career pathway where we know there are jobs? So if we know there are jobs in IT, is it and maybe I'm asking way too many questions, but is it even our responsibility to help inform students who come in to talk to us to say, I know that this is a potentially good job area? So if you'll weigh in on that in the chat, I'd love to have this conversation with you.
A great comment there by Ray Lewis saying that many of his students come to him as the career services facilitator that they just don't understand how to research the labor and career market and then how to ultimately match that up with their desires. So there's a disconnect between first gen and lower income students that simply don't know how to navigate college itself.
That's so true. So certainly related to Ray's comment is how do we use that labor market information? If we know we have access to it, and if today was the first time that you've seen that there's a database that'll tell you what are the hot jobs or how much money can folks make if they do different things, or is it even in demand in your region? So that's labor market information, or LMI. We can use it for a bunch of different things. We can look at workforce and economic trends. So that's good for a very macro level. For the economic developers in our state, they're using it to think about what's our density of talent in the state, so that you have the whole state picture. It's a lot easier to recruit a chemical company to Chemical Valley because we already have the talent here. We already have the chemists, for example. And so there are more chemists in Chemical Valley, it turns out, than there are in other parts of the state. And so it makes it an easier sell to tell a company, hey, you need this kind of talent, and this kind of talent already exists in the labor market here. So we wouldn't be starting from scratch. So that's one way to use it. Certainly around business investment for businesses' needs and expectations. So businesses have their own LMI databases that they're digging into and saying, do I want to go to West Virginia? Do they have the talent I need? When we talk to companies about coming into the state, the first thing they really start with is, do you have the people in West Virginia who can staff my company and do the things that I need? So when we are thinking about job creation and bringing jobs into the state so that we do have that pipeline for people so that they can stay here, we start asking questions about what are the needs and expectations of a company, and do we have the people who they need? So I think we all play a really important role in that talent development pipeline. And then for our students, it's about that career planning and preparation. So if they know, gosh, nursing is a really in-demand career today, and it absolutely is. But the other thing that we're seeing in our trends, so if I run trend data in the same format and I look out 20 or 30 years, what's happening, and this is super morbid, but worth saying is if we look out 20 years, most of the baby boomers who need nursing services right now, they're going to be dead. And so we won't need as many nurses because we won't have that population that are so dependent on that segment of the healthcare system. And so there's a real ebb and flow that we can anticipate within the field. So if we're training students today who are in middle school to think, if I'm a nurse, I'll have a career forever, that's probably not true. If they're a nurse and they're in middle school today, they'll probably have a career for the next 20 years. But if their work trajectory is longer than 20 years, there's a good chance at some point in their career, they're going to need to reskill and do something different. And so one of the best gifts we can give our students is to help them think about career pathways through their lifetime and how they can continue to retool. I've been back to school several times in my life already, and I anticipate that I'm going to have to keep going back to school because technology changes and opportunities change and the labor market changes. If we see the Hyperloop here, that's a game changer in terms of locations for West Virginia. All of a sudden, you could live in Williamson and work in Martinsburg and be there in 30 minutes every day. And that is mind-blowing right now, but it's where the technology is taking us. So to help our students understand that they could retool and do something else or be somewhere else is a really important part of that career planning and career exploration. And then certainly from where I am right now, when you think about running a school, being a college president, being a school principal, how do you decide what training and education offerings to offer? So one way I've seen people do it sort of historically is a company comes in and says, I need whatever they need. I need someone who can do machine tooling. And that's great. And so verifying that need in your community with real data means that you don't just have to make decisions based on that one person who's in front of you saying they need people who do machine tooling. If we get into the data set and find out, gosh, not only do you need machine tooling, everybody needs it. We've got a huge need across our region, then it's a program worth starting. But if you dig into the data and you find out, that doesn't seem to be true. We had our school system produced 5 people in machine tooling last year, and there were only 4 jobs in machine tooling last year, then there's probably a disconnect and probably not a program that you want to start up at your school. So helping, depending on where you are in your school system, helping your administrators be able to make good decisions with this data set becomes really important, that you want to offer programs that lead to jobs for students. And then you also want to be able to advise students into those programs where there's jobs. And then the last part of it on here is really, as we think about job search opportunities, is how do we help students understand? Because at least what I'm using is a subscription-based service. How do you either give students that information? Do you do workshops for them? How do we get this information out to students? Because they're not getting on the internet using LMI to decide what their major ought to be or what they're going to study. And so how do we make those connections intentionally for the students who we're serving? Because we really want them to be employed here in West Virginia. So it's a lot. It's worth just pointing out that the LMI can look at occupations, can look at program level information, industry information. We can do both statewide trends and regional needs, and look at analytics within job postings. So if you get into this service or others, depending on what your school subscribes to, it's a really rich set of information. And first of all, it's just worth knowing that you have. And then starting to dig in about how you use it. I saw that Pam was on the call today, and she's out at the Higher Education Policy Commission. And she's one of my go-to people. If I have questions or if I run into something, I'm like, Pam, does this resonate with you? Because I know she's another person who's thinking really intentionally about our labor market and how we're connecting people to jobs by using this data set. So I would ask you all right now to sort of start with the end in mind. And I have 2 questions for you if you'll put these into chat. So pretend you're a student, and if you're asking students these 2 questions. So what career do you see yourself in? And what career cluster are you interested in focusing on that attaches to that career? So let's start with that so we can actually pull some examples out.
So some folks are mentioning coding.
Oh, great.
That's seems to be a very popular one recently, and healthcare. Engineering.
These are great.
Education, still such a need for
Yeah.
educators, especially in specialized areas here throughout the state of West Virginia. Bus drivers.
Oh, CDL is a really interesting one. I may hook on to bus drivers just because I happen to know that that is the #1 occupation that's been posted right now in West Virginia. So let's do that one just because I know there's such a huge need. So let me come back so I can share something different. Although I may want to come back to coding. We'll see how much time we have. Okay, so it's not going to be bus driver specific, but it's CDL. I think it's here. So this is a really interesting occupation because there's a huge national demand also. There's slightly more jobs in West Virginia than nationally, but it's an interesting job because what I've come to learn about it over time is there's two ways of looking at this kind of position. There are short haul local jobs, so things like bus drivers, and those folks tend to get paid less. That they're local, but they have a lot more flexibility. It's a pretty short-term training program. We can see people who can get a CDL in 8 to 10 weeks in most places. So we're not talking about a ton of training, but we're also talking about lots of job flexibility. And if you end up doing something like driving a bus for a school district, then you also see that you're getting the school district benefits. So that's not something that shows up here with the compensation, but certainly worth talking about for people that, you know, you end up on the school district schedule and you have the same time off as your kids. So there's some real life benefits to taking that lower salary. But we also see, and part of the reason the median is so high for people who have this particular role is because it's split. And what we see with the other group are the folks who are long haul drivers. So people who drive from New York to California twice a week, they're hardly ever home. They're making a lot more money, but they also don't have the same kind of quality of life. But this is a job that businesses are constantly telling me, and that we can see over here by the really hot demand in West Virginia. This is a job that folks are posting like crazy and just cannot find people for. So if you have a student who's sitting in front of you and they're saying, you know, I don't have plans for college. I don't want to go. It's not for me. This isn't my future. This is a really interesting sort of entry-level job that takes some post-secondary training, and a number of our CTEs in the state do the same CDL training. So there's lots of opportunities in the state to get access to it. But it's a good wage for very little amount of training that you'll have employment for a long time. This is another one of those jobs that if we end up seeing self-driving trucks, we're going to see 2 million CDL drivers out of work overnight if we see self-driving trucks. So it's the rest of the conversation to have with students is, you know, we want you and come in and be the bus driver for us. And that's going to last a pretty good long time if you want it to. I mean, obviously that we talk about career pathways and how do you move into something else, and that's important. But the other thing that's important is to help a student who says that this is their pathway, help them understand that we're on the verge of technology that can put them out of a job. And not to say not to do it, because we clearly today need it. And it's possible that self-driving trucks never become a thing. But if they do become a thing, we have 2 million people who have this job right now in the United States who are going to find themselves out of work. And so then that means our job as educators will be, how do we take those 2 million people and get them back into a community college? How do we get them back into a 4-year institution so that they can get training in some other area and do something else? And so it's starting over constantly with that same career exploration that we started with. So while we see career exploration in middle school, and we need that and it's important, we also need career exploration throughout the lifetime. Because if you took me into a space where now all of a sudden I'm driving a truck and I think this is a great job and I'm happy about it, that's terrific as long as the job still exists. Let's do coding because we have enough time to. So somebody said they were interested in coding. Let's see what we can pull up. I'm going to go with computer occupations, although if this is your interest, I would certainly encourage you to get in here and to decide if I've picked the right occupation, because some of them become tricky. But I mean, a great choice. West Virginia is definitely hiring in this kind of job. But I think the other part I would want to point out to you is, while West Virginia is definitely hiring and it's slightly more demand than we're seeing in the United States, it's only 2,000 jobs in West Virginia. So that means that not everyone, I mean, that's a lot, but 2 of our community colleges, if all the students at the college decided they were going to do this job, that would be all of the jobs. And then we would have saturated the market. So I think it is worth saying, as we dig into this, 2,000 is probably a bigger example, but we'll end up, sometimes you come up with jobs where there's only a couple of hundred jobs in the whole state. And then all of a sudden you start thinking about, is this, first of all, something that I would advise my own kid to do? I always ask that question. If I had, my daughter wanted to do this, would it be a good choice for her? And generally that's a good criteria for me of, if I wouldn't tell her to do it, then why would I ask someone else to do it? But it's a great paid job. We see the compensation for people who are in these computer occupations is terrific. And we're actually, West Virginia is right at the national average. And so this might, I wish I had looked at this before COVID, because I would be curious to know if this had anything to do with just the changes that we've seen in the last year and the availability of remote work. But we also see that job activity is low in West Virginia, that we would expect to see more postings than there seem to be. And so what this tells me is that people are getting into these jobs in West Virginia through relationships and not through job postings. So the jobs exist, which is what we see here in 2020. So there are jobs in West Virginia, but they're not being advertised. So this speaks to me as an educator that if I want my students at Bridge Valley in these computer jobs, that I need to have those relationships with companies, because they aren't posting their jobs, they're taking students directly out of training programs. And so you have to have the connection either through an education institution or to know somebody, it looks like, to get these, because there's almost half the jobs that we would expect to be posted with the job density that exists. So, and does that make sense to folks? How I'm evaluating that because there's not the job postings here, it means students and adults are getting jobs in some other way through this particular area.
And I actually attended a career fair. It was at Richwood High School 2 years ago that one of my Gear Up coordinators, Carrie Mullins, put on. It was absolutely wonderful. And they had some coding folks, some software development folks that attended their career fair. And they talked about how they were able to work remotely from West Virginia for these larger firms across, national firms. So it was really unique. I think the person had even moved to West Virginia because they loved West Virginia so much that they wanted to live here, but they were able to work for companies from all across the nation. So,
and I can see now in chat, it looks like Josh weighed in and said that he validates what I'm saying, that DC firms are looking to hire people in Huntington and to work remotely. So stay in Huntington, work from Huntington, and do a job that's remote. And so I think we have the potential, and we've proven in the last year that this is possible. The question becomes, how do we capitalize on this and help our students understand, how do you work remotely? How do you apply for a job that's remote? One of the things that I saw from the Harvard Business Review in the last year is you can work remote, and we've pretty much proven that that can happen. But what the researchers at Harvard are finding is that you can't get promoted. So if you are working remote and you're enjoying that flexibility, that's great. You're trading that off for promotions in your career. And so to know that, even first of all, so to help people who are going to enter the workforce understand that that's currently a thing. Whether it's right or wrong, it's real. And so helping students understand, if you're going to work remote, you're getting benefits of being able to have your life be a certain way. Is that a trade-off that you're willing to make to not continue to get promoted in the next couple of years? And maybe it is, but maybe it's not. And I would way rather that students went into that as an informed consumer rather than being surprised that they have less of a chance of getting that promotion that they wish they could get if they're not in an office. So I would ask you all, I'll share my screen again, to start thinking about a student who you've worked with. And if you picture that student in your mind, what are 3 possible occupations in a career cluster that they've talked to you about exploring? And if you'd share those in the chat, I'm curious sort of where your students are. And as you're thinking and typing, the ones who I always think about, I'll stop talking and let you type, and then we'll see what you say. Do we have any occupations or careers, Jason?
Up, there's culinary, medical field, nursing, sports medicine, cybersecurity, welding, cosmetology, nursing.
Those are all terrific. And I think you all are spot on in thinking about how do we help students think about these as those initial jobs. The 2 pieces to add on would be so great. Like, let's take welding. We can look up the job outlook for welding. We know that that's a thing. What's the career trajectory on welding? So again, helping students understand, you get some really solid experience welding. Do you then want to join the Navy and become an underwater welder? You know how much underwater welders get paid? $200,000 a year. It's a crazy salary. Is that a part of the career trajectory? Do you want to open your own shop? Do you want to have your own small business? Do you want to have your own large business? And so to help students sort of vision what's even possible and to name that, so that, yes, by all means, today we want you to be a welder and we want you to have that win. And I think that's the idea for me with career pathways, is we're really trying to get students to have both initial wins and long-term wins. And sometimes that means they have to come back to school, and that's okay. So to help people really understand, especially early on, that when we talk about lifelong learning, we're talking about a whole career trajectory. And sometimes it does mean, gosh, I need to circle back, and it turns out now I need a certification in mediation because I didn't think I needed that, or I had no idea that I was going to need that, and now I do. And it's completely fine to go back. So to help sort of normalize that lifelong education component. And the students who I worry about a lot are the ones who come in and say, well, I just don't know. And so I'm curious if you all have good strategies. What do you do with students who are talking to you who say, I have no idea what I want to do. I have no idea what I want to study. I'm just here because my family's making me, or because some teacher told me that it was a good idea. What do you say with them?
I think there's always just a short delay from the time that folks type stuff in to what pops up in the platform. So we'll give them just another moment here. But what are their interests? What do they enjoy doing? As you guys can see, I posted a moment ago, there are some great career cluster surveys, interest profilers, learning style inventories, and other assessments available for students directly on cfwv.com, which is our kind of our statewide platform. Basically, it provides a lot of career planning and college planning, financial aid planning tools and resources. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but if you haven't checked it out before, hop on. You can create a a profile as if you're a student. And I think there's a demo area you can kind of play around in. So you can, do some of those assessments, and then they can actually save them into their portfolio and refer back to them later. It has some of the market analysis like Case or Dr. Sachs has been talking about. But they could then even take their career that they identify in CFWV and go over, and you could research it in that, was it EMSI?
That's right.
Site, to even probably get more detailed information.
And so I think, great points. Both Joanne and Jeff have said, what do you like, you interested in? And I think interest inventories are a terrific starting point. The thing that I feel like I see folks at least in colleges, often be unwilling to engage in is, what are you good at? And so there's definitely both the where are you happy, which I'm for, but also where's your aptitude? So often, even when I supervise my own staff, I'll start with, well, what do you want to do? Okay, where are your strengths? Okay, that's another thing. And so it's both of those that, I might want to be a ballerina. I'm not going to be a ballerina. I'm not good at it. And so there's some of that in the conversation too. I might take dance classes. I might like it. I'm certainly going to appreciate the ballet. I like going to the ballet. I'm never going to be a professional ballerina. It's not in the cards for me. And so there's also that version. I see it a lot with some of our young male students who are convinced they're going to be professional basketball players. They're not going to be. One in the whole of all of us who know students right now who are playing basketball, we might collectively know one student who could make it. And so I don't want to advise students to go into an area where they just don't have that same aptitude. And I think that's a much harder conversation because it's not as warm of a conversation. But thinking about, are there things you could do that are related to basketball is a really different thing. And here Pam's saying she's talking to her own kids about this, that there's this disconnect of what are your interests, what are you good at, and what makes you passionate, and that there's sort of a confluence there of what we should really be focused on. So I wouldn't lose the aptitude part.
A couple great points in the chat. Jeff Eads mentions that, something that you enjoy so much in your life that you would gladly do it for free, and then start figuring out how that applies to a career. Christy Wood says that we really need to get away from what do you want to do the rest of your life, and change that mindset of how they're going to change jobs. Yeah.
Great point, Christy. And I think that's a huge takeaway for this is, what do you want to do right now? And let's get you some experience. And then let's let that experience lead to what the next experience is going to be, is so important. So there's one more tool I want you all to walk away with today. So let me pull it up. Another thing that I found is really helpful as I'm both having these conversations and just thinking about career pathways that exist. Apparently I don't have my websites up. Sorry. Okay, so hopefully you can see the internet again. The US Department of Education actually has a really great tool. It's called the College Scorecard. So it's at collegescorecard.ed.gov. And you can search a couple things here that I feel like are worth showing you. So we can search schools if we want to know, like, how's Bridge Valley doing? We can pull up, here we go. Apparently there's a slight lag. Okay, so I can look at Bridge Valley in particular. I could also look at occupations. So in a second, if I go back and look for programs that are welding programs that exist, I can actually dig into how's Bridge Valley doing. Here we are. Here's where the institution is. We can see that there's just over 1,600 undergraduate students. We know that it's 2-year and public. It's small. We can dig into what fields of study are being offered, but this is where I get into data that I'm really interested in. How much money are students making? And what are the programs? So clearly this is a humongous range between $19,000 and $82,000 that students leave Bridge Valley with. But here, if you highlight over it, we can start to see that what you study makes a huge difference in your salary. That if you're At the 19,000 range, it's because you've gone into mental health, social sciences, some of those helping professions pay a lot less, which is not surprising to any of us on this call, but sometimes really surprising to our students. And then on the high end, we get into physical science technologies and technicians, and that those associate's degrees are paying students $80,000 to complete a 2-year degree program. So you can really get into some of this information. And I found that this is a great tool to help students just think about, what are my options? So CFWV is great to think about College for West Virginia and how do we dig into this? And you already know about this tool, and there are other workshops today that help you think about that as a tool. I would point you to these other two because I think they're sort of less acknowledged in the state and really good, especially if you have students in border communities. If you're up in the Northern Panhandle and you have students who are thinking about, well, what if I was to go to Pittsburgh, and how does that look? How do I even get information about them? There's not a college for Pennsylvania. And we really do want students to explore all of the things that could be the right fit for them. And especially when our region includes potentially other states, how do we start to parse that out? So, my preference would be to keep everybody in West Virginia, but because that's not everyone's reality, how do I help a student choose between a community college program in the Northern Panhandle and a community college program that's in Pennsylvania? And I would say the college scorecard is a way to really dig into that, to understand, gosh, I would be paying twice as much to do the exact same thing in Pennsylvania as I would in West Virginia. Maybe West Virginia is a better choice because that makes more sense. But I think it's just giving you the tools so that you can talk to your students in a way that's intentional. So those are all of the things that I planned on chatting with you about today. I'm happy to keep talking if you have things you want to put in chat. Happy to have that as a conversation, but I just really appreciate the time that you spent here today. Thank you.
Well, while we have a moment, I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Sachs. Thank you so much for all the information you shared today. Thank you for joining us today. And we can open it up for any questions. So if anybody has specific questions they'd like to ask, or any additional thoughts, comments, want some additional information or expansion about anything that Dr. Sachs shared today, please type it in the chat box, or you can add a question anonymously in the Q&A if you prefer to go that route as well. I'll ask one quick question. How do you foresee your new role as president of Bridge Valley? What's maybe a 5-year vision that you have?
Oh gosh, let me survive the next 90 days, Jason. I think right now we're really just talking about building relationships and making students as successful as possible. It's been really our focus. So that's where I am today, but we'll certainly come out with more and give you more information as we can.
Certainly. Has there been one major, this is an area that we want to look at adding for students, or an opportunity or a job or career field that you feel like is going to be it's on the cusp, it's ready to happen?
Well, this hasn't happened since I've been here, but that I've heard in the last 6 months is that there's a huge need in the state for people who can lay fiber. So when we think about fiber installation, not sort of my go-to place where my head goes, but you can make $100,000, it turns out, laying fiber optic cable. And the job doesn't take a ton of training, but it essentially takes one piece of wire that has 140 pieces of hair, is how the people in this space describe it to me, and connecting it to another wire with another 140 pieces of hair. So it's using some specialized equipment to clamp 2 pieces of hair together, and you have to do 12 of them a day. And it's the guys, I've only ever talked to men who do it, but the people who do it say it's pretty tedious. But you're in West Virginia, you don't have to go anywhere. It's not a commuting kind of job, and we need a lot of it. So that's been one that's been really interesting to me in the last few months. That was sort of surprising that we need people who can install fiber optic cable. And yes, Lisa, we still do have 2 campuses. We have the main campus in South Charleston, and then we also have a site in Montgomery that serves students who are in the Montgomery area.
We had a question if they could get the links to those data tools.
Yeah, and I think this is being recorded, so all of the information will be available on the archive for the Student Success Summit.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. So you folks have a few minutes. You can check out the gallery area. Thanks again, Dr. Sachs, for joining us today. It was a great presentation. So
thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.